Leave to avoid gore. If you are so inclined, do feel free. I consider Scanners an underrated Cronenberg feature, to some degree. Whilst it is one of his best known films, primarily for the iconic head explosion scene, featured here slowly, it might be considered lesser comparatively to his most lauded works, such as Videodrome, The Fly, Dead Ringers, maybe even Naked Lunch, or probably one of the recent works such as A History of Violence or Eastern Promises. Yet I'd call Scanners thoroughly engaging in the theoretical/cerebral avenues which his most celebrated work is cited as travelling. Scanners is not someone's idea of a telekinesis-based action thriller. Rather, it was Cronenberg who had a very serious idea about human mutation, state-funded weapons experimentation, a grave fear of futurist encroachment, and the convictions of desperate fugitives. Scanners can be perceived as a depiction of a hunted grouping of humans, a manifestation of guttural generational warfare, not alike De Palma's The Fury, which, while also spellbinding and entirely genius, was an adaptation, whereas Scanners was totally Cronenberg's imaginative spark. Or about how quasi-photorealistic yet animated film violence was to replace the explosion, inviting the graphic slaughter of a human to be the focal point of violent mainstream cinema to join hands with the explosion. Rambo 2, next month Friday the 13th Part 5, followed by Delta Force, and then Halloween 5. Scanners intended the head explosion as its opening scene initially, which, one, would have made Scanners be considered the film with the single greatest opening sequence of all time bar none, deservingly so, maybe two. Perhaps in this instance, the idea that Cronenberg was heralding bloody visceral violence as a new counterpart to the fiery explosion would hold more volume as a proposal. Consider Videodrome's subsequent commentary on the nature of violent media, pornographic ideology, psychological protrusions enabled by evolving mediums, and a neurological surveillance via an all-encompassing analytical bureaucratic state swarm of observers and puppeteers. Cronenberg's desire to metamorphise social speculation via his practical effects ought not to be a very surprising concept. If The Brood wasn't an overt metaphor, I'm not sure what is within the Cronenberg filmography. The point is, Cronenberg had serious philosophical political reasons for his horror displays, and is one of the few, maybe the only, whose horror stems from the pathology rather than squeezing intellectual substance in order to spice up the horror feed. Perhaps even Carpenter, or Argento, or even mighty Hitchcock, though not always likely, desired spectacular suspense first, and were interested in human psychology, contemporary philosophy, and experimental modes rather secondary. Cronenberg never seemingly sought to compose a bloody horror movie first. The Fly might be an exception, and I'd consider slightly overrated in his oeuvre, if not just for the garish performance, as usual, of the irritating, unenjoyable Jeff Goldblum. Though Cronenberg's take on The Fly is dependent on a distinct take, certainly. Rather, Cronenberg understood violent gore as the most appropriate or only appropriate method of communicating his rather consistently lurid, enrapturing, terrifying original ideas. Possibly the most captivating of all film artists, I sometimes can believe, is David Cronenberg, one of the most immediately engaging, continually stimulating, and enviably inventive filmographies of all time, I'll confidently state.